From the lab to your ears.
You're listening to WonderLabs.
Hello, and welcome to WonderLabs. This is Chris Richardson. It's cliche to reference the community and its loss, but the fact that it's become cliche might be telling us something useful about our contemporary living situation. The fact is that I've never experienced a strong sense of community. Where I grew up in social housing, people with little would often steal from each other and disrespect their space. When I later moved to London to study and work, my neighbours kept themselves to themselves, as did I. Nobody ever stayed in one place for long. With people living in temporary situations, in houses that have often been carved up into small flats to eke out the value of every square inch, putting more money into the pockets of landlords while widening the gap between those who can afford a home and those who cannot, it's not surprising that there was, and is, no strong sense of community, at least in many of our major cities. But community has existed, does exist, and can exist. The first step in creating one is remembering that such a thing is in fact possible, which is half of my motivation for releasing today's episode, reminding us all that we can come together, and can achieve more together than we can in isolation. The other half of my motivation is to capture one of the many worthy stories safely secured in my grandparents' heads. Not because I think we'll be losing either one of them anytime soon. They're actually in better shape than many people I know in their 30s, but because it's a story worth capturing. And perhaps it'll inspire you to dig into stories of your own family, your own history. These stories are interesting, but they also have the power to reveal different ways of thinking that contemporary society might have all but forgotten. So, today I'm pleased to welcome Lesley, Groom and Chris Sparrow to the show. They've had fruitful careers in sociology and social work, and their lives have been full of interesting experiences. Today, we're diving into just one of those experiences. In the early 1980s, in a town called Rochdale in Greater Manchester, Lesley and Chris set up a residents' association when their neighbourhood was declared a housing action area. On paper, this meant that living conditions were deemed unsatisfactory and had to be improved, brought up to standards. In doing so, the government planned for this to improve not just the housing stock, but also the well-being of residents. In reality, this meant that residents had to foot the bill for improvements to their homes that they may not have wanted, or may not have felt were warranted. So, the Residents' Association was initially set up to help residents get access to tools and skills in order to facilitate mandatory repairs, instead of paying other people to complete those repairs. But it later transcended this basic function and evolved into a fully fledged community space that brought people together. It's a beautiful story about what's possible when people come together, and how a project can blossom in beautiful and unexpected ways. It's also a story that's close to my heart, as it's a story about where I was born, a town that lately only seems to get press because of unemployment rates or child grooming gangs. In this episode, we talk about the house on Spotland Road that was set up to hold tools and other supplies, and how the space evolved organically to serve the needs of the community, including cooking classes, childcare, photography, and festivals. We also discuss the UK's lost tradition of radicalism and the culture of risk, the shifting aspirations of the working class, the intentional limits of the state education system, and the power of social media in promoting both narcissism and social change. Ultimately, the message is one of optimism. As long as we have examples to lean on, we can remember that alternative realities are possible, and perhaps preferable. The sense of community many of us are craving is one that will take work, but one that's possible to achieve. And, as I see it, one that's worth achieving. It's a fun and playful conversation that gets to the heart of many of the troubling aspects of our society, and what we might do to correct them. Again, I encourage anyone with time and a microphone or a pen to speak with people in their own family. There's bound to be plenty of fascinating stories there if you go asking. Better to store them in your own brain rather than risk losing them to history. For now though, here's one to get you started. A community space on Spotland Road with Lesley, Groom and Chris Sparrow. And you've got enough battery.
It's like looking at a hospital machine with a pulse.
Like ER.
It's like my heart rate. Right.
Is that all good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, first of all, I'm kind of frustrated that we couldn't do this in person, but we are where we are. So, thank you both for chatting to me after what is presumably a long day. I'm not entirely sure what it is that I'm here speaking to you about, and I've got some ideas about what it is and how it sort of relates to some things that are happening today. But I suppose loosely, in the past, you've mentioned a project that you both worked on together with a community space. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, but if I give you a bit of a context first, yeah, because Chris reminded me of how long ago it was, right?
Okay.
So, can you remember the years?
It's about 1981, I think.
Proper Thatcher time.
Something like
Yeah,
that.
very much Thatcher time.
They declared the area we lived in a housing action area, which was basically, you don't clear the slums, you improve the houses. So the thing is that when they set up a housing action area, part of the deal was they encouraged residents to form residents' associations to have some sort of input. How cynical you want to be about that is, we can be fairly cynical about it, I think, but that's what they did. So some of us decided to be involved in setting up a residents' association, which meant going round to lots of people's houses, knocking on doors and getting people to come to a meeting to decide what we wanted to do.
So, a residents' association was established. And then I think that, I don't know how you secured the building, how you got the building.
The first thing was that people were pissed off about was that when they declared a housing action area, what happened was the council would improve your house, but it made you do improvements that they wanted doing, even if you didn't want them doing, basically to make the buildings last longer. It wasn't a bad idea, but they then encouraged you had to pay some of it. So people weren't happy about that. So we, as a group, we decided to set up a tool library so that people who didn't have access to any tools could actually repair their own houses. And we had a skills register for people who would be prepared to go and paint a wall or put up some wallpaper for somebody. So then if we got a tool library together, which we did, people donated all sorts of things, from ladders to hammers to whatever. We needed somewhere to put it. So we negotiated with the council and we got a terraced house on the main road.
And it was one of the big old Victorian type houses. It was a big place. It had an outside toilet, a small kitchen, but enough rooms. So from that, we got all this equipment. So we had a tool library and people used it. They'd come in and they'd borrow step ladders or paintbrushes or whatever, and other people, not many, but some people volunteered to go round and help, say, older people who they couldn't do it physically and they didn't have the equipment, so they'd fix the doors or they'd do basic things like that.
Move the bed out so they could hoover under it because they couldn't move it themselves. Just really simple stuff.
But what came from that as well was we actually started, we got donations of paint from some factory that, it was a horrible paint, it was bright orange, so the building was painted orange.
Some people like orange.
Yeah, so it stood out, and also we painted the toilet outside, we sorted the kitchen out, and one of the from that, a woman volunteered to do cookery lessons on a Sunday morning for the kids. Young people, teenagers, little kids, anybody, just kids. So they used to love it, going in on a Sunday morning with this woman, learning how to bake a cake or do basic cooking. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, Chris organised a photography. You tell him what it was about.
Well, two of us applied to Northwest Arts for a grant to set up a dark room. So we set up a dark room in the little bedroom upstairs, and we got some hold of some cameras, and I used to go out with kids and take photographs and then develop them, print them in the dark room. Not many kids. I mean, but 3 or 4.
But they did go out and they took photographs of their environment. That was the purpose of it. Well, part of it was to do with how do the kids see where they live, that sort of thing. So they take photographs of washing on a line or a load of crap up a wall, or, just that's how they saw it. So we had the cooking, we had the tool library, we had the photographs. There was a development on from the photographs, which was, we've still got all the photographs from it. They're massive. There was a project.
You still got them?
Yeah.
Yeah, loads. They're massive. You can't. And it was called Spotland Shoots Itself. We set up like a tripod outside the house. It's on the main road, and Chris sorted out with some other people, sorted out where people just came walking past in the street and said, right, do you want a photograph of you and your kids or whatever? We had kids with bikes with like trophies showing them.
We made a booth. We made a white booth so that all the photos had the same backing.
Yeah, it's all white.
People came in to the booth. Well, it was like a 3-sided arrangement. Stood in front of it with a camera with an electronic remote control.
So they pressed the button.
They decided when they took the picture. They took the picture. Then the following, we did it for about 3 weekends. And they'd come back the following weekend and collect a free print, like an A4 print of the picture. And we kept a copy. And in the end, we had them all laminated onto boards, which are upstairs, about 6 pictures on a board. And it went, we had it on display in the house had then got a bit more developed by that time, so we had it on display there, and it went round a few places. It went to Preston University, it went out on a few exhibitions anyway.
It's interesting whenever I go to a photography exhibition, one of the things that I've talked a lot about with Liliana is the side of themselves that people choose to reveal when a camera is present. And I suppose that also applies to the sorts of things that people were capturing when they were going around the neighbourhood and taking pictures of what they saw. What kinds of impressions do you get about people and how they see themselves and how they see the place from those images? Yeah,
well, what is interesting about the self-portraits, aka Spotland Shoots Itself, is a lot of the Asian men would stand there like very proud looking, and then you'd get some where they'd bring the wife and the children. It was like a really big deal. You could tell after we'd broken down come on, have a go. We were really informal, and it encouraged them then. And then they'd come back, you see. So they say, can we have one where, kids would come back and say, can I have one with me BMX or whatever, the bike? And it was like, it was beautiful. I love them photos, and we've got about...
There's about 30 of them, I think, or something. I can't remember now.
There's a lot.
Quite a lot.
But
even the community policeman came and took his photograph.
Yeah.
I think we had fortnightly residents association meetings that 15, 20 people used to come and turn up to and argue about all sorts of things, about whether or not, the government was doing a good job or whatever, because we had one of the government ministers came to the project, didn't he?
He got locked out.
He came and we didn't let him in.
we boarded it up.
And it caused a lot of trouble.
We had we put on bring and buy sales.
We had a festival.
Craft sale. Yeah, we had a festival.
We had a weekend festival every year with...
On Cronkishaw Common.
Sort of the staples that people have at these things, you know, like the police dog demonstration or whatever, you know. I mean, it's... And we also had a parade through the streets on... Was it Bonfire Night?
Yeah.
People
Halloween.
it was really nice, actually. I mean, it was quite magical, some of that was really, really good. The other thing that was important was that we did... One of the things that happens when you have a housing action area is that loads of cowboy builder firms come in who do shit work and make a mess. We helped sort out some of those hassles. Lots of the pavements got really badly damaged. And we did a photography thing going around photographing all the smashed up paving stones, because old people falling over, breaking limbs, right. Sent that to the council, and that achieved something. They did eventually, do you know what I mean? So there was this sense of trying to have a good time, but also there was some sort of purpose behind it.
Yeah, I think it sounds like purpose is really at the heart of the thing from the beginning. And it's interesting as well how you go from a very specific problem, you know, like providing tools to people so they're not getting shafted over prices for things, to almost more kind of essential things like cooking, and then you can sort of branch out into things that are maybe a bit higher up the hierarchy of needs, like photography, like festivals, even though it's all kind of essential, really. What was the story with the council person that then came and tried to come in?
Well, it wasn't. It was an MP. What was he called?
George
Young.
He was the one who was in charge of allocating the money, basically.
Under Thatcher.
And he wanted to come because I suppose they were... I don't know what... I suppose they just wanted a publicity thing, that's all. Yeah. And we just didn't want to... You know, Thatcher was doing all sorts of really horrible things and we just didn't want to play ball with them, so... You
see, they'd been to Liverpool.
A lot of the people voted Conservative who were in the association, so they weren't best pleased.
But the government were like, under Heseltine, he went to Liverpool to open up this garden, whatever he called it, you know, because there was really bad unemployment in Liverpool. Yeah, the riots had happened in Liverpool. So we went round, you know, and all the photographers were there, and it was on the media. Oh, look, the government are doing something. They're making this garden. As a matter of fact, it all got disused. It failed, really, in the end. So having somebody come to Scotland from the Conservative government was like red rag to a bull with us, you know. It was like, why are they going to take the credit when really... anything that the council even wanted or hoped to get out of it, it was more about how it ended up. It was what did the people want in that community, in the Scotland community. And that's where the organic thing, I think, came from. It was who was interested in it, you know. I was interested in it if there was any way I could contribute. So did other people who said, oh, I'll come and cook. Really nice woman, dead unassuming woman. Wasn't she? She was just a really nice woman who said, oh, I'll come in on a Sunday morning and do cookery for the kids. You know what I mean? So it built itself in a way. It was organic in that respect, what came out of it. So even though, yeah, it was a residents' association in the strictest sense, it wasn't when you went and saw what was going on there.
It also led on to a couple of us who were there set up we got another house off the council and set up a creche so that people could, it was free, so that people could, and it was staffed by volunteers, so that so many mornings a week, people who wanted to go into town shopping could just leave their kids and we'd look after them. I mean, a lot of it just couldn't happen now because of police checks and all. You know what I mean? There's no way these days they'd have let me in a locked dark room with a load of teenage boys. You know what I mean?
And a camera.
Yeah. So I mean, it was a slightly different era, really.
Well, sure, but I mean, at the same time, I do want to get to this era. Maybe before we do, though, just that sense of it building itself and community is something that I almost can't imagine happening in 21st century city, for instance. I don't know if it's a north-south thing, if it's an urban-rural thing, if it's a rich-poor thing, or all of the above. But when people were making something from nothing like that, do you get a sense that that's embedded in the culture of the place before this kind of new wave of individualism, or is it something that was kind of strengthened by the fact that there is this new wave of individualism and the government's not really doing anything for you?
I think the context then was a lot different than it is now.
In what way?
Because if at the time you had things like the miners' strike, you had really bad unemployment, poverty, under Thatcher this, just looking at it historically. And there was a lot of people who were educated in knowing that, things were bad and they wanted to contribute to people who didn't have a voice at the time. And so I think part of it's about empowerment, part of it's about saying, yeah, we want you live here, what's it like, what do you need round here? What I'm saying, putting it crudely, you've got some middle class people interacting with working class people from different ethnic backgrounds as well. I don't know if it'd happen now. I think it'd be very formal, I think, because you've got valuing diversity, you've got anti-discriminatory stuff. At the time, I don't think it was... People were tuned into things like that, but a lot of people weren't. And it was more about valuing where they live. And you also, there's a woman called Beatrix Campbell, B. Campbell, she wrote a lot on the riots on the States and saying, looking at why are people destroying where they live. When people burn their own houses, they loot the shops, they set fire to the pub, they wreck everything where they live. What are they doing? Why are they doing that? So there was a wider context where it was, we want to build the community, not destroy it, and maybe not even channel people. People did, they wanted to get involved. Not everyone, but a lot did. And, and some of them were the movers and shakers within that community. So people knew them, especially the older people. So now what you've got, the nearest we've got to it, unfortunately, under COVID, was when everybody's going out in the blooming street clapping for the NHS. And
as opposed to giving them a pay rise or something meaningful.
Yeah, and we stood out here, I'll never forget it, we stood out, we've got a 90-year-old opposite us, but you did feel like when you see these older people, I'm glad they're all right. We can't go and visit them, but I'm glad they're all right. And that's the nearest, I think, anybody's got recently to feeling a sense of community, for want of a better expression.
I think the other thing that's really, really different was then people took risks and councils took risks.
Yeah.
There was a tradition of radicalism. There were people who would call themselves radical social workers. There were certainly radical community workers. Lots of grants available for people. I got involved with setting up a community arts group with government money, which is still going. I don't have anything to do with it, I haven't for years, but they're still doing stuff now, yeah? But you could get access to that money and it was valued, and there were people working in the council who were prepared to go out on a limb because the consequences of doing that nowadays will probably be terminal, but it wasn't like that then. People would go out on a limb. We decided we wanted to develop the project by having a paid employee, and we got the council to fund the wages for that employee. We argued for and got the right to interview them, decide who we wanted. We had our own fund. We administered their wages. They gave us the money to administer their wages. Things that it just wasn't corporate to the same level that it is now. That would not happen now because somebody would say, oh, well, supposing they run off with it, or supposing this happens, and supposing that happens. But there was a history of councils being more, and it was a Liberal council, it wasn't even a Labour council, being more into stuff like that. There were loads of arts projects, there were loads of projects of people doing this and that all over the country. And when I did my social work training, it was in Newcastle, and I did a project up there going around the estates with kids taking pictures of where they lived and then doing all the pictures. But because I did that, I met a lot of people who were involved in loads of stuff like that was going on, all with little bits of funding from here and there, and it all worked. And then so many years later, it all got the chop.
But can I just say, don't underestimate that political and economic context, because there was riots, people were destroyed. I mean, there was bands singing about it. I Am the One in 10, UB40, Ghost Town by the Specials. Because of what was happening with the unemployment and the poverty, and there was a lot of unemployment. They had youth training schemes that were crap. They were just going in hairdressers and sweeping up, and that was the training. The government would have rather paid, they paid the employer to take on young people. So to me, a part of it is they must have been getting worried, the government, because there was that many, there was the summer riots. It was happening in America as well. There were riots going on in the big cities, and, being cynical about it. Part of it is, you can keep them busy in the community. Do you know what I mean? It's almost as if they're doing something. The government are saying, we'll give the councils money to help these communities. I'm not knocking that, but that could have been part of the context at the time.
Sure.
Plus, I think the age group of the people that were getting involved and being motivated to do something, these were people who'd been at university a bit before. They were now in the jobs where they had some sort of influence if they worked in local government, in universities, in youth work, in social work. You've got them sort of people, who were... It is political and ideological. Mm-hmm. Now what you've got, you look at those ingredients and then look at it now, you've got students graduating with student loans with a completely different outlook, a different era. You've got people more individual, even Thatcher was promoting that at the time. There's no such thing as society, she was saying, and it's blooming worked, because I think more people are more privatised, more individualistic, less looking out for each other. Don't get me wrong, this is still happening in really poor areas of Manchester.
This is almost like it's built into the thing as well, right? If you set things up in such a way that you encourage people to be individuals, to break down community, you make it really difficult for people to have rights, you keep wages low so that people are basically happy with precarious, low-paid, 0-hour contracts. It becomes really hard to think about the sorts of things that would help you to get through that situation, like having a community around you. It just becomes something that people don't think about, and also they don't imagine how things can be any other way. And I think once it has been a certain way for a certain amount of time, people almost don't know that other things are possible. Like the situation that you've described is something that I couldn't imagine happening in my own community.
No.
To me, it feels like my life began while some process that started years before I was born had been played out for a decade. I mean, I guess you can pick any arbitrary starting point, but it feels like it was in the middle of some process that's basically been continuing since then. And I don't know that the radical politics you describe of that time exists now. And it seems to be the case that people can't imagine alternative realities.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I do. I think it's more like people are frightened of just subsisting. People living in them containers, one on top of the other, and calling that their home, you know, and people living in bed and breakfast, and they're on 0-hour contracts, or they're not on any, you know, they're not working, and they're feeding the kids in one bedroom, you know, horrible bed and breakfast place. The other thing that's different as well is the council house estates were very much, I mean, I've lived on one on Langley Estate when I was a teenager. You know, all these council estates, a lot of the houses have been sold, and you've got housing associations now that you never had then. So you've got, in terms of so-called social housing, you've got housing associations and you've got council housing, and the rest is all private, you know, private rented, bed and breakfast, flats, you know, all that. So that has changed. It's no comparison, really. And even people who lived around Scotland in terraced housing, you know, a lot of them had bought them. They might not have cost a lot, you know, they might have been about 10, 15, 30 grand to buy, but it was people did that, or they rented, and it's just completely different now, I think. The whole, you know, the mixed economy of housing is just completely different. There was a really good book written, I think it was in the 50s, and it was written about, was it Bethnal Green? Wilmot and Young, Bethnal Green, and it was about how communities were getting destroyed, which happened where I was born in Newton Heath. They knocked all the houses down, and they ended up moving people onto these estates at the top of hills, because it'll do the working class good to get fresh air in the lungs, sort of thing, yeah? So we had Langley, Darnhill, Hattersley. And so communities were broken up there. Where they lived doesn't exist anymore, so they've wiped out my history, yeah? It doesn't exist. It's now a Metrolink stop on the way to somewhere, you know, the whole area's just completely gone. So you then try forming new communities. If it's not in a house, it's in them big flats that they built in the 50s and the 60s all around the country. People are still trying to live in communities, but it goes, because you're not living the same. You can't leave your doors open anymore. You can't do this, you can't do that. You can't have ball games. It's all about what you can't do anymore. And I think gradually, I just think you're right, over the time, the communities there's nothing holding them together apart from drugs at the moment in a lot of places. You know, for young people, what they've got is belonging to a group that deal with drugs. I know, I'm not, you know, and that's their status, that's what they do. They've got nothing else.
That's probably not surprising. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's probably not too surprising that you turn to those kinds of things when there isn't anything else going on. And even the way that these spaces are designed as well, I get the sense that not many of them are really oriented towards bringing people together.
No.
Into some sort of space where people can actually coexist in a meaningful way without needing to work too much at it. As soon as you put people in these little boxes and you don't have places where people can properly congregate, it becomes really difficult to even have the space that can foster and facilitate those kinds of interactions, which is probably why the house that you had was such a useful thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of that, is that the people who used it were the people that set it up, really. What happened, really, was that in the end, with that project, the council took it over. The council forcibly allocated us a community worker. She ended up doing a lot of the legwork and, in a sense, taking over the mechanism of the way the place worked. And then in the end, the whole building was taken over by the council. They renovated it. As far as I know, it's still there. It still works as a community centre.
Really?
Yeah, it's still there. But it became somewhere where it was all done up. They did it like they did the houses up, replastered all the walls, put like glass doors on it and everything. But it was somewhere where they ran groups for things. They were perfectly good in their own right, but no one in the community actually owned the space. It was very much council space. It could have been it was like a council office.
Yeah. It didn't feel like...
It wasn't ours anymore. Some of the stuff that it was used for was still good, you know. You can do good things in bad places, but
sure.
It wasn't the same, really.
And there was a place in Scotland, have you heard of Easterhouse? That was another place that... I've got a load of books upstairs of that period where people were doing good stuff in communities to include people, and then people becoming more and more empowered the more they felt that they had a say in what was going on, say, that estate or wherever. Right up to probably about 7 years ago, there was a really good book written about public space, and it was giving examples of who actually are. So Manchester, for instance, there's lots of new flats built, hundreds, thousands, there's loads. I don't know who's going to be able to afford them or whatever, but they're all there and people are living there, and it's great because they've got little Sainsbury's opening up and cafes, and it's great, you know, the Northern Quarter, places like that. Now, who actually owns these spaces now is unbelievable. It's companies, you know, so, and there's CCTV everywhere. And on the surface, you think, well, that's good because if anything happens, you know, at least we'll have it on CCTV. However, they move people on. They don't want the beggars. They don't want the loiterers. They don't want certain things going on in groups in certain areas. I used to teach a women module years ago, and I used to say to the women in the class, do you go under subways or, you know, walkways, or what's your latest you go out at night? On your own, what do you do? And they said, I wouldn't go round the subway, I wouldn't get on the bus late at night because that bus is full of bloody drunkards, and I wouldn't do this and I wouldn't do that. And I said, but they're your spaces, why don't you do it? Fear, you know, because the men, basically, they didn't want to get attacked, or what do you do if you're walking in under, you know. And I said to them, what I do is I hold keys in my hand, and then if somebody comes to attack me, I'm going to ram the key in their eye. I don't think I can't imagine me doing it, but the point being, people's sense of what's dangerous, what isn't anymore, it's I don't know it. Combined with what you said about, you know, if you've got no job, or you're more individualistic, you're more privatised, because they used to say it's the middle classes that are more privatised than the working class. But I think the working class has been well and truly conned by, you know, trying to aspire to become why aspire to something that's crap anyway, but but they've been, their community or their spaces have been dismantled. So I think for people who've got less power in society, if you've got a house and you've got a well-paid job and you go on holiday and you do all these things, you're doing okay. You know, you might want more, but you're doing okay compared to somebody who's got none of that. They've got no power, they've got nothing, absolutely nothing. And so probably they're just in pure survival mode from day to day, from hour to hour sometimes, you know. Shall I have the eating on or shall I feed the kids, sort of thing.
To me, it almost defeats the point of having a developed country.
Yeah. Because
I don't even know if you can call yourself a developed country when you've got such an inequality and such a discrepancy in the kinds of experiences that people are having.
Yeah.
And also, this isn't my bit, but, you know, many people have pointed out it's not even good if you're wealthy at that point, because you're living in a gilded cage where you can't really go out and do anything.
Well, they don't, it's the usual. You go on your keep fit thing, routine, whatever you've got. You do that, you do your work. You've got your set holidays, you've got your set... everything is timetabled. None of it's organic. And
spontaneous.
None of it, and it's... But, that... If that's what keeping hold of sanity means, or what do you get from it? What is it that you're getting out of it? And I'm sure there's plenty that people can justify what they get out of it, but you've got other people trying to aspire to that, or feeling bad that they haven't got that, or they'll never get it. So it's more about, feels more like survival, even though way back with Spotland Community Centre era, that was, we had a blooming Margaret Thatcher was a horrible, nasty piece of work. Riots were going on, unemployment, but you still had some sense of you've got some control over it.
Hope,
right.
I think. You still had hope.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think there's a lot of hope around.
It's a pretty short supply at the moment. I'm an optimist, and I don't want to believe that the world is going to shit completely. And I would like to imagine a world where we can rebuild some of those things that have been lost, and where you can empower people with a sense that they can affect change in their local community, in their own lives, and where they can create spaces and environments that allow those kinds of connections to happen and flourish. I can't live thinking that that's not possible and thinking that it's just going to be a downward spiral. So I don't know if you would agree with me with the optimism.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for all I shout and wail and swear and everything about the government, about I can do it till the cows come home, but that's me with hope. I know it sounds perverted, but it's like, it's when you don't do them things, if you've got a memory, you keep that memory going of what it can be. If you've never had that memory, then you look at the examples of where it did work. It's keeping that flame alive, if nothing else, until, I think, some people will do something. Do you know what I mean? I don't... What? Yeah. I do.
They'll storm the Capitol building.
I really... No, I really believe it.
That's what they'll do.
If it's no choice, you've got to.
No,
you've got to go
completely.
forward. You've got to keep those memories, those flames alive, because someone somewhere, or some people, in some places, where hopefully those examples will keep on going. There's a thread there. There's always been that thread. There's always been, look at the women's movement in the 1800s. Look at the women's, you've got that thread of people not giving up, just saying, yeah, well, it'll happen. Sometimes I think, oh God, I'm too old. I've had enough. But given an opportunity for somebody to say, right, this is what we're going to do, I'm going to be there. They're all still there. And that's why I keep saying to myself, why do they always say, as you get older, you get more conservative? I understand it because I see my dad and I see older people, how they are, even though I'm now classed as an older person. But I've gone back, I've reverted. I have, because you see
You've gone more radical.
You just see what's around you, and you know it's not right. This isn't the way it should be. It's not right.
The numbers thing as well is interesting. There's a lot of emphasis on these kind of very sexy, glamorous, top-down policy decisions where we can, with the stroke of a pen, impact the lives of millions of people. But to be honest with you, 3 or 4 people in a photography class is profoundly meaningful and in its own way is influential. It's changing the world from the bottom up. And I think that's the sort of thing that people should be thinking more about. And as long as you can keep some energy for the whole thing, then maybe there's a way out. So assuming that you are radical and also, in your own words, getting old, what should younger people be thinking about and doing?
Well, one of the problems with that question is the education system. How do people learn to question and to critique and to analyse and to philosophise? It's the education system it allows the status quo. It allows a group of people to go to university, get the so-called education, go to university, learn how to question, learn how to problem solve. Some don't because they can't be bothered. They just want to get through the university because they want to be a doctor or they want to be a solicitor or they want to be an architect or whatever. And they just channeled to that and only think of that. But you do get people at university who do question things, who do problem solve in the wider sense of it, all those things. Now, unfortunately, in the state system, the education system, a lot of that isn't facilitated. It's about rote learning. It still is. I know people say it isn't, but it is. It's about how to pass an exam, how to do this, how to gear them into a so-called vocational course, and not question really, not question anything. I mean, it's like the skills deficit model. It's always been with the working class. They need upskilling, they need reskilling, and they're doing it again now because of COVID and Brexit. Oh, we need to upskill the workforce. Not the ones that are going to university, the others. And again, people are missing out on being taught how to question. So as long as you've got that, you're not going to get a lot of people saying, hang on, this isn't how it should be. You're actually being straitjacketed into problem solving in a certain way, a functionalist way, one that solves a problem for society as the elite see it. I know I've gone off a bit, but, you know, that's one of the first things I used to do on the first year for our undergraduates was question everything, question me all the time, pick me up about things. Why am I saying this? What, you know? And they used to love it because they'd say, you're talking rubbish, or, you know, but you've got to do that. And they're not doing it. They're not teaching it in schools. Teaching it, some people are, because, you know, they're getting the elaborated code of language. Others are still in the so-called restricted code of language.
To be honest, I think that's probably why it's helpful to have community spaces that exist outside of the regular institutions, so that you can create those places where you can actually have those conversations.
Yeah, have the conversations in their language. Instead of being ashamed of how you articulate what you want to say, actually it's valued. It's not valued in our English GCSEs. It's not, you know, you've got to be a certain way in how you express the written word or the oral word.
I was just going to say, though, that it doesn't alter the fact that in the 70s and the 80s, there were a lot of community developments that happened, and the education system was substantially exactly the same as it is now.
Mm.
I don't think people were taught to question anything then. I don't think it was particularly different. I think the only thing I can think of that's different is that to some extent that was valued by people who had some sort of power, who actually and had the money to allocate to people to allow them to express themselves and to do things. I mean, we're talking about a community project, but it's true of arts funding and stuff like that. You know, I don't think the world... I mean, I think the world's really different now to what it was in 1980, but I don't think people's education is any worse than it was in 1980. And it happened then. There were those developments then.
Yeah, but
So-
you had the Black Report in the education. So you actually had the governments saying the education system needs an overhauling because it had trendy teachers, you know, who were like wanted to be called by the first name, and they wanted to teach about real history instead of, you know, monarchs and all that. You did have that going on as well.
Yeah, you still have that though.
You still have it, yeah, but now you're on a PGCE course being taught in a really functional way. I'd take your point. I think there are differences in who's...
I think the world. I mean, I can't say much about it really, because I don't. It's not something I actually give very much thought to anymore, to be quite honest. But I think the world is really different. I think the world is really individualistic. I think movements that were around when I was younger, like socialism, being a hippie, all sorts of things like that, had some sort of idealistic. You were part of something. People were more part of something for idealistic reasons. I think now, you know, I don't think there's. I just don't think there's any depth to anything like that. I don't think a lot of people, all they think about is quite narcissistic stuff. But there must be community groups. There must be people doing exactly the same thing somewhere.
Well,
Food
they
banks for a
are.
start.
I mean, sure. I mean, those kinds of things providing essentials and necessities, which frankly shouldn't exist anyway. But even that is sort of born out of the same sort of political ideology from the 2010 coalition government. That's kind of an extension of the stuff that was happening with Thatcher. It's about making government small and letting the community take care of themselves under the rubric of people taking responsibility.
Yeah. But it's funny, social media, I don't know how I came across it, because I'm on Facebook and I'm part of Manchester History Facebook group, you know, them sort of groups, because I like my history.
Have you been to the Pankhurst Centre yet?
No, have you yet?
Okay, maybe not any time recently.
I'll get there eventually. I haven't even seen Engel's statue yet in Manchester. No, let me just finish this bit.
Okay.
So I somehow I got onto this link. Somebody was offering the services in terms of, do you know any people who want their house plastering, or I've got a cooker and a fridge that I don't need. They're perfectly serviceable. Do you know anybody who wants them? It's some sort of community group on Facebook that's about offering services or resources, you know. And then people asking, has anybody got such a thing? And it gives you, within a 10-mile radius or round the corner. You know, you've got that sort of things going on. I've only just found out. It's probably been going on and I've not known anything about it, but I thought, that's a good idea. Even taking into account what you've said, Chris, about more individualistic and, you know, it takes the onus off the government to be responsible for anything. But I'm glad it's there.
Well, I guess as long as it's serving some function.
Well, it is.
As you said, if you need something like right now, but again, my vision of the future is one where people are spending less time on the internet and more time outside.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking me on that journey. We usually wrap up with a quick fire round.
Go on.
What are you most excited about for the future?
Young people. That's where the imagination comes from, because they've got to deal with what's going on now. So they've got a better angle on it than I have, because it's their future.
If you could wave a magic wand and shift our collective thinking on one thing, what would it be?
Questioning different ways of doing and different ways of being.
I can't explain. I think it's something to do with the way that people relate to each other. That I'm not sure I like the way people seem to relate to each other at the moment. It's very hard to explain, and it's a very hard question to answer, because we're really isolated. I don't know what other people are doing. We've been like this for a year now.
Well, on that note, what's one thing that everyone should do after listening to this?
Riot.
Lesley and Chris, thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Thanks for tuning into WonderLabs. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who you think might enjoy it. You can also email us at wonderlabspod@gmail.com. This is your host, Chris Richardson. Our brand was designed by Lloyd Preston Allen, and our jingle was produced by T. Fitzgerald at For The Record. You can find more music from For The Record at soundcloud.com/WEAREFTR. Special thanks go out to Liliana Laborde-Dozian. We'll see you next time.